Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security. Last December, Polish critical infrastructure was cyber attacked, and certainly we need to take a look at the incident and see what it tells us, what it teaches us, what we can learn from that incident. I am going to discuss the official report, which was published by the Polish government, and everybody can download it from the internet. I've put the link into the video description. So let's see what we got. Energy sector incident report from December. It's by Third Polska. Then we have an introduction. In my opinion, this doesn't really meet my expectation, because what I would like to see is an executive summary where they tell us the most important facts. They're just informing us that an attack did happen, but we don't learn what the impact was, and how the attackers got in, etc. The bottom line is you really have to read pretty much all of the report in order to figure out what actually happened. But luckily, I have done that for you, so I will try to condense it for you and present you what I think are the most interesting facts that are shared in this report. So just high-level view, they are discussing three different cyber attacks on three targets, but those three attacks happened simultaneously, and they apparently are interconnected to some extent. We have two attacks on Polish critical infrastructure in the electrical power industry, and then another third attack against the manufacturing plant. And they had to do with infiltration from the internet using internet-facing VPN firewalls, etc. We'll get to that in a minute. And interestingly enough, for none of these attacks, any significant damage is reported. So to some extent, we'll get to that. The first attack was successful, but even though it was successful as far as the infiltration is concerned, and the destruction of software products is concerned, we'll get to that in a minute, no real damage was done other than loss of view. That means no impact on the power grid, which is, I believe, one of the most important findings from this reporting. For the second attack, the attack, I would say, was successfully thwarted. For the third attack against the manufacturing target, we don't learn about any damage. So they also don't tell us if it was unsuccessful. So we are left a little bit in the blind here. Anyhow, so let's go to the details. First, the attack on renewable energy plants. You don't need to read those first 2 pages here, because they are just describing their specific configuration of their windmills, etc. We are not interested in that. We know how that works. Here is now the attack vector. And here is where it gets interesting. So those windmills are cyber protected with a FortiGate device. Okay, so they have a security perimeter in place. In each affected facility, that FortiGate device was present, serving as a VPN concentrator and a firewall. And now it gets really interesting. In each case, the VPN interface was exposed to the internet and allowed authentication to accounts defined in the configuration without multi-factor authentication. That certainly is a little bit hair-raising, because you already get the suspicion, or did these guys really know what they were doing, or were they among the many who think just slap on a firewall and then we're good? Unfortunately, that happens very, very often. And just to share some insight from my 20 years of consulting experience, in those whole 20 years in all the customer projects that we did, I have never seen a proper firewall configuration, not even once. But so just as a side note, that means if you're in the security business, you should be prepared for this problem. People install firewalls, but they don't bother to configure them properly. And maybe what's even worse, they never bother to have an independent expert check the configuration, which I believe is super, super important. Blah, blah, blah. And then during the analysis, it was determined that some of these devices had been vulnerable in the past in certain periods for extended durations, including to remote execution and vulnerabilities. That's another, in my opinion, important takeaway of this report. If you think, again, you slept in the firewall and then you're good, you don't understand how this whole security business works. So all firewalls, antivirus products also come with their share of vulnerabilities. And so you need to exercise the same caution and care that you do for all of your other devices. That means you need to check for known vulnerabilities that pop up every now and then you need to update the firmware. And that is just something that you must specifically do for those devices which are internet facing, and this is what we're talking about here. Then, so that is like the infiltration vector. We are talking about FortiGate firewalls, vulnerable, no two-factor authentication, and that was the open door. And obviously, the asset owner was simply under the illusion that they had some decent protection because those firewalls did cost a lot of money, and so they will have thought they were good, but in fact they were not. Okay, then they talk about RTUs. Further, it was the damage to the RTU was the direct cause of the loss of communication between the facility and the DSO, and that prevented remote control but did not affect the ongoing electricity generation. Okay, so that is interesting. So what they refer to as disruptive activities, and we'll get into more detail in a second, this is about loss of view. So when they talk about destruction, no physical or no equipment was physically destroyed. They managed to make the couple of RTUs defunct, which in a sense led to a denial of service situation where the operators could no longer monitor those nice windmills, but the windmills remained intact. Electricity production was not impacted, which is the good news. Okay, so that resulted in a loss of view, and that is what they label as destructive activities. And now it gets more interesting. So now we are getting to the beef in this report. So they have some Hitachi RTUs. The devices were configured with default credentials, including an account named default. Guys, are you shitting me? I mean, so I can only laugh about this because this is so blatant, unprofessional configuration that it's just mind-blowing. And don't get me wrong, in that respect, I think the report really goes a long way. I like the fact that this is addressed with no sugarcoating, right? So they tell us, so if you know how to read it, these are the mistakes that were made and that made this attack possible. And if you remember my previous videos on other attacks, I used to tell you when you want to assess a cyber attack, and specifically an OT attack, the most important question is what would have prevented the attack? And in this case, it's rather simple. So, I mean, they had misconfigured their firewalls. They didn't bother to care for any proper access control for their RTUs. They left default credentials on there. They had even an account named default, which is like a big invitation sign for hackers. And this is what they got. As simple as that. So I'm sorry, but I cannot feel any sympathy for those Polish engineers who actually configured those devices. Didn't care about two-factor authentication, left in default credentials. So that doesn't look good. But again, it tells you a lot. And this is, again, why I really appreciate the report. It tells you what stupid mistakes people make and what you should avoid. And certainly it's not so difficult to avoid. All devices exposed a web interface accessible from the GCP network and with appropriate privilege, reachable from the FortiGate device. So there you have your infiltration vector. The attack was carried out by logging into the web interface using the default account. The account had permissions to modify the device firmware and was used to upload corrupted firmware. Interesting, isn't it? Now, here is a question for all of you. Have we seen that already? You must know this as an OT security professional. You must know this attack vector. You should know. We have seen that in Ukraine in 2015 already. And if you really are up to snuff, you could even say, "Oh no, they did a Boreas on the Polish infrastructure." So this attack vector was identified many years ago by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And it was dubbed Boreas because back in the days, they had started an initiative where they identified sophisticated, very nasty attack vectors against critical infrastructure. The first attack vector in that series, if you will, was labeled Aurora, the infamous Aurora attack, where INL on purpose blew up, so physically destroyed an electric generator, as you would find it in a power plant, by cyber. That was the Aurora attack. And then, what comes after A? There comes a B. And so then they had semi-published the Boreas attack, which is exactly what you see here, exactly what you have seen in Ukraine 2015. You upload rogue firmware on a controller, but it's not just it would do all kinds of malicious stuff. No, it's just it makes the controller unusable. It bricks the controller. That's the whole purpose of the attack. And so, in other words, it's just a denial of service attack. Controller is no longer usable. You will not be able to upload a legitimate firmware image because the firmware loader is part of the firmware. So that avenue, that ship has sailed. That means you need to physically replace the controller, send it back to the vendor, and let them fix the situation. How many of those spares do you have? Interesting question when you think about disaster recovery. But that's a known attack vector, and apparently nobody bothered to check for that. I can only tell you we did that in our consulting days. We checked for such an opportunity, and apparently somebody in Poland did not. So what else have we got here? The secure update feature, which enables verification of the uploaded firmware's digital signature was introduced in version blah, 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 but required explicit activation. None of the devices that supported Secure Update had this feature enabled. Oh, isn't that a surprise? So again, we see what could almost be categorized as negligence, or at least as something that is really inappropriate configuration of those devices. Then we have a bunch of other RTUs, different make and model. So in a way you could, it really becomes more interesting, because what this tells us, the attackers really did their homework, and they really put all the effort into that attack, something that we haven't seen for a while. So for example, if you remember that attack against the Norwegian dam, just as a reminder, I have also talked about this on this very webcast, the Dam of Doom. So you see that in our Common Sense OT Security playlist on the OT-Base YouTube channel. They were pretty lazy attackers. But here, which is interesting, they actually put in the work. So they did not embarrass their profession, I tell you that. So they actually put a lot of thought into this. The attacker used default credentials to log in via SSH to an account with root privileges. Well, guess what? We have seen that before, right? For the other devices that have been compromised, they also had default credentials. The attacker then executed a command intended to delete all files from the system, which resulted in device failure. This is how it's done. If you want to accomplish a DOS scenario, where then ultimately in this case the operators will lose view. But again, fortunately, that didn't have any impact on electricity generation. Next, we have IEDs. We have protection and control relays. It gets more and more interesting. These devices have the FTP service enabled by default, which provides access to the device's file systems. The attacker used a built-in account with default credentials. So here you have it again. So do you see a pattern here? I can tell you I do. So nobody at this facility actually had any ideas about access control. So they just didn't care. Or maybe worst case, let's just leave it as it is, because otherwise we might no longer be able to log on. Then we have some HMI computers. These machines were configured with the default password, setting deployment with local admin privileges. Man, I mean, and the attackers really went all the way for a full exploit of all that inappropriate configuration, inappropriate access control. In cases where an HMI with different credentials for the local administrator account, unsuccessful password breaking attempts were observed. In those cases, the HMI was not damaged. And guys, here you have it in a nutshell. So where somebody was actually cognizant enough to change the default credentials, the hackers couldn't get in. I mean, they were already knocking at the door because of that internet access, but they couldn't get in. They couldn't compromise those HMI stations just because they did not use the default password. And so again, I have to say, I love this report because it's so rich. It's rubbing it in your face, guys. Just do some proper access management, change the default passwords, use two-factor authentication for any remote access. That is like really a case in point here. So in that respect, I think everybody should read that report, even though it's only just those couple of paragraphs that I'm pointing to here. It's a very important insight on how you can fuck your security up by not caring. And also, I have to say, also by not verifying, but by not undergoing any kind of audit. So, you know, I made that point earlier. The most important question is always what would have prevented this attack? And I already told you all those default credentials, etc. But all of that should have surfaced in a proper risk assessment that I have to assume those Polish utilities never did. Because any risk assessment, cyber risk assessment, should have pointed that out. Otherwise, if they did a risk assessment, they should get their money back, because the assessor must have checked those details. How are the firewalls configured? What about any access control mechanisms on those RTUs, on the HMI computers, etc. So that's a very clear picture that you're seeing here, and you should take it as that. It really tells you how simple it could have been to totally block this attack from happening. Then they have some Moxa serial device servers, just like in Ukraine. I mean, I don't know if it was Moxa in Ukraine, but in Ukraine 2015, it was also about those Ethernet to serial adapters. Very interesting attack vector if you know about that Boreas vulnerability, my friends. The device had the web interface enabled and were configured with default login credentials. So there you have it once more. So it really gets rubbed in your face, guys. Okay, and then we have another attack on another plant, and we don't go into detail here because essentially this attack, as I mentioned earlier, was unsuccessful. And what do we have here? And so this device configuration did not have two-factor authentication enabled. Oh, okay. So they were able to get in, but then for the wiper, when they wanted to place, they were also successful in placing the wiper on those machines, on the computers, but in this case, the attack was blocked by the security solution. So that's a little bit further down. Let's see where we have that. The executable file was not detected by antivirus software. However, its execution was blocked at runtime by the EDR solution through the use of a canary mechanism. Very, very nice. I love it. But they were already in, so they were able to break in to compromise the perimeter. But they couldn't execute the destruction of the files because the operation was blocked by the security solution. Yes, and then finally, attack on a manufacturing sector company. What do we have here? The device had been vulnerable in the past and its configuration had been stolen and publicly disclosed, including in a post on an online forum by criminals. You probably should have caught that, guys. But anyhow, so as I said earlier, for the manufacturing side, we don't have any additional information if the attack was successful or not. So I just leave it at that. And I would like to point out again, why should you read this? Why should you just watch this webcast as an example? In order to learn. And I would posit that other outlets, other organizations are also talking about this attack, but they don't want you to learn. They want you to get scared. Oh, look at all the scary stuff that's happening. The attackers are targeting the critical infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. This is not what gives you any value. So you don't want to be scared. You should not be scared, especially when you understand by doing proper analysis how simple it would have been to thwart this attack. That's the most important thing. This report teaches you a very important lesson. There was an actual attack against critical infrastructure, against the electric grid of Poland, but it wasn't successful. However, it was successful partly because of completely blatant failures in the security configuration. And that's all about access control. In this case, it is all about access control. First, you got the internet-facing VPN and firewalls with default accounts, etc. And then after the perimeter, you got the computers, the HMIs, etc. Also with default accounts. So that speaks a very clear language. It would have been super simple to completely and successfully block this attack, but somebody was lazy. Somebody didn't do their job. And I mean, as I've said it earlier, as I can say it again, you should not be in charge of critical infrastructure, or for that matter, of any significant OT operation, if that's the best you can do when it comes to OT security. So this is just malpractice, what you see here. This is a complete failure when it comes to proper usage of cybersecurity equipment and procedures. I mean, they got the firewalls in place, but they didn't use them properly. They didn't bother. And they also didn't bother to check. And that was maybe just as another important takeaway. My advice is, guys, every now and then, just get an OT risk assessment done. Yeah, it's going to cost you, but it's money worth spent. It's really worth spending because you will see misconfigurations such as this one exposed. If you don't, just sue the consultant. They must be able to catch this. Okay, so we have one comment. This is interesting. Default accounts and default. Yes, I absolutely agree. This is, if you ask me, it's really interesting considering the target. So again, critical infrastructure, electricity generation. Well, no, that is not what should be allowed or what should be possible. And then also, and if you consider all those regulations and the EU, the CIS2 and the CRA and all that stuff, right? But it didn't help to prevent this disaster. And again, it's not a disaster in terms of physical outcome. It's a disaster for the security operations of that particular plant or that particular organization. This is how I see that. Okay. So we don't have any other comments, questions, so I just leave it at that. But once more, as a reminder, if you want to discuss stuff, if you want to be on the webcast, just send us an email or a message. And then if you have an interesting topic to discuss, you can be on this show. Okay, see you next week. Bye-bye.